Everybody back. I was thinking to start with a small recap of what we discussed yesterday, and I was wondering if you could just mention, maybe a few of you, what you got out of it, like the main points, the main issues as we discussed yesterday, about the climate, about the ecosystem. Just what surprised you, maybe. It's already there.
What I understood is that you were trying to organize the discussion of climate change within the philosophy
Yes.
of Sutra.
Yes.
So you were trying to sketch out the big picture
Yes.
in order to make to make discussion today connected with.
Yeah, to make it like more mind-expanding experience than merely looking at a hockey stick from Al Gore, which is just causing panic. Like we discussed, it's good to get some motivation to really, and that was his purpose, to make people aware of the whole climate issue.
And I mean, drawing on this analogy, it's always very interesting to look at the trees up close, but it was interesting also to get this.
To step back.
Yeah, and look at the cedar forest.
To place it in a bigger context, also because we want to find solutions based on a different motivation than just panic because of the climate. Because fear and panic, that narrows the mind. I mean, it's an obvious thing. Another thing which I would like to point out myself, and which you could know because I spoke to her later, Yoga Maya said that although solar energy, so solar is photovoltaic, so the solar cells, solar kind of technology, maybe probably the most subtle energy resource which we're having today, which is quite good actually. It's very promising, but it has some deficits just as well, which you don't typically hear from, let's say, from the manufacturers or people who have, let's say, financial interests also. Also, if you link it to Prout, solar cell technology is also being capitalized. She was using the term neo-capitalism. Anyway, that's the economic part. We don't really want to go there. But nevertheless, solar panels also need to be produced, and the production, and also to get rid of them, produces all kind of waste and CO2, etc., etc. So this is one other reason which she pointed out why, if I may quote Sarkar in a different context, there she is, we need nice solutions, and we're going to look at Microvita theory, B.S. Sarkar's new line of thinking, where he says we should study this Microvita science with no delay, otherwise many problems in society will not be solved in a nice way. So this refers to much more than just energy. We're talking about energy now. So, and in order to have kind of a scope and a motivation for a bigger picture, for real revolutions, and even also Bill Gates said, we need really technological breakthroughs. We need breakthrough innovations to get out of this whole climate crisis. And but that being said, and like yesterday, still to recap a little bit, when we look at the whole evolution of the climate and the ecological equilibrium in the geological history. And like we said, we are living only in a very, very, very small niche of what is possible of the ecosystem in terms of time-wise and in terms of volume, in CO2 levels, temperature, and there are more issues. So if you look at the history record, which is, let's say, not controversial at all, then you might conclude that even when we wouldn't do anything bad to the environment ourselves, then sooner or later the environment is going to do some real nasty stuff itself. The planet doesn't need us to completely run out of control. And we have seen that so many times during extinction events that we went through that yesterday. So one of the other things was that we could place the current, what we call energy resources, in this Brahma chakra, from subtle to crude, and then back to subtle. And later on in the process of this so-called relative crudification of consciousness, if we use the resources which are produced by the earth later on, the cruder they get and the more polluting they get for the environment. So this is sort of a recap. So let's just skip ahead a little bit again because I was going back. So, and this is okay. Just this is an example of the. I think it's called ITER. This is a nuclear fusion attempt. They won't expect any results until a few decades after now, maybe 2040, 2050. So this might also turn out to be not a nice solution in Sarkar's term. So the purpose now of this part 2 is not to, let's say, to understand or to reframe the whole climate issue, but to positively look for solutions, taking the help of, let's say, our expanded view now, and taking the help of P.R. Sarkar's philosophy and especially theory. So in the first part we went through Brahma Chakra, or the cycle of creation, the cosmic cycle, from a little bit conventional point of view. So we will review it in a little bit more detailed style, also a little bit more in spiritual style, and especially we're going to look at the Microvita theory and especially Microvita cosmology. So we're jumping now from the climate into really very deep into the philosophy, and then we will see again how that relates to climate issues. Let's just go on. To be continued, so that's what we are doing now, obviously, solutions. Okay, so what we're having here is, we're doing a little bit physics now, physics class, high school physics, or maybe just first year university physics. If we have two energy volumes, like two bottles with water or whatever, or gas, one is hot, the other is cold, and we connect them, so then the temperature is distributed, so they become same temperature, the temperature is equalized. So the total energy obviously remains the same. If it's a closed system, very simple, just what you would expect. However, the total entropy increases. That's the second law of thermodynamics. So if we do this simple thing, just replacing energy, the main act of replacing energy, because energy cannot be destroyed, you can only replace it. This is being punished by creating more entropy. That means roughly more chaos. So the extraction, basically the whole use of energy as a commodity is punished by the laws of nature. So this is a little bit like a sad situation we are in. So now the question is, how do we use energy versus how life uses energy, how the macrocosm uses energy, and how biology uses energy. So the two phases in Sanchara, in the cycle of creation, basically. We are always having this problem. Whatever we want to do to create a little bit more convenience for ourselves, which we need to grow as a civilization, immediately is punished by creating entropy, by creating chaos. And one example of this chaos is Al Gore's hockey stick. It's the erasing CO2. So already because of this very simple basic facts of thermodynamics, I'm not necessarily so much a climate scientist in the sense that either way, to the left or to the right, we get punished for what we're doing. If we have something else, then it will be another negative effect. So what is entropy? It is just a very rough example. It's a very advanced subject. It's a very difficult subject, but put simply, it means going from higher order to less order, to higher disorder, less information, or more distributed information. So, and again, the main act of using energy as a commodity creates chaos. And therefore the idea is that nature does not use energy as a commodity. So energy kind of remains harmonically locked up in the fabric of life. There's a very big difference between what we are doing as an industrialized civilization and what nature is doing. And nature has itself so much abundance. Like we discussed yesterday, etheric oils, which you can buy in the shops here, is abundance from the plant world. So we can use it for ourselves. It's all abundance. 99% of the fruits which falling on the ground, they don't become new trees. It's all abundance. So life does not increase entropy. In fact, life is a decrease of entropy, decrease of chaos, against the pressure and the demands of thermodynamics. Basically, life is in a sense unnatural if you look at the physical laws. So there's still a little bit of mystery. So people have these ideas about self-organization, and sometimes you get this discussion about Darwinism and intelligent design. I mean, I just want to put forward that, I mean, I believe in the intelligent design, really. What the universe is doing from our limited perspective is very intelligent. Not necessarily some intelligent guy with a long beard or a religious thing. The universe itself, in effect, is intelligent. So now we have two things. The picture here is just, which I was very happy with to find online, is this is a very simple representation of our ecosystem. It has many cycles, many different kinds of life cycles. Yeah, in this case, habitat formation, biomass production, etc., as you can see here. I mean, it's extremely revealing when you see it this way. And now, let's now look at what Sarkar says about what I think is very much the same principle. You can read on the top. This is coming from his chapter on microvita and cosmology. And there, Sarkar really introduced a new cosmology, very much different from the cycle of creation, which is typically called Brahmachakra, where he introduces, let's say, a very different way how consciousness manifests itself as the creation as we know it. So he introduced different faculties, and we're going into it now. But here we see it's called the knowing principle, or supramundane knowledge, expressed energies of different characters, etc., etc. So, and that is it seems to kind of point out how energy exists in nature. Energy is not non-existent in nature, but energy in nature functions as an equilibrium. And we know that in science, but for business people, energy is a commodity. And for us as users, as consumers, energy is also a commodity. And that's the difference. In nature and also in microvita cosmology, energy represents an equilibrium. And that's why it's called Purusha. It's called Gya Purusha, G-J-I-N-A, or Jina. It's called Gya, is pronounced Gya Purusha. And that's Baba says, or Sarkar says here, this is expressed energies. We can see energy working in the manifest world. This manifest energy, very obviously. So this energy works out in the planes of inferences, to quote Sarkar, which is basically the physical planes or the physical world. This is what we learn in high school. This is what quantum physicists are still stuck into, essentially. So, if we consider how, for example, biologists or ecologists look at our creation, that's more similar already, naturally, to what Sarkar is saying. So here's a point. Energy is an equilibrium rather than a commodity. That's, I would say, from my perspective, is the main difference between how we use energy industrially and how nature uses energy. And the idea, of course, is to take this as an example, to develop technology based on these ideas. So energy-based equilibrium is quantitative, and that's how our science works, that's how industry works, that's how our electricity meter works, and that's how business works. It's all quantitative. Natural creation is based on the qualitative equilibrium, or equilibriums, or equilibria, I don't know. Okay, so far a little bit, let's say, indirect introduction into microvita science. Now, let's look at just pick an example which I came across, is the photosynthesis. I mean, it's quite well known to everybody, so I don't need to really introduce it. So we have the chlorophyll. It's concentrated in small lumps in the leaves of plants. Yeah, I should use the mouse actually. So when we have this chemical equilibrium, where obviously an amount of energy is needed to produce carbohydrates, essentially sugars, out of water and CO2. So this is the chemical formula which is keeping our atmosphere fresh and breathable. Without these plants and algae especially, there would be no O2, because the other production is O2. Most comes from algae. So Now, if you look at the chlorophyll molecule, it has a nucleus, it's a magnesium core, and it has a carbohydrates around it. Oh, again, sorry. And it has this kind of tail kind of thing. And we will get back to that later. Why does it have this shape and what it could mean? But let's just assume a working hypothesis, which is that plants might not necessarily literally absorb sunlight, but rather use sunlight as a catalyst or as a template for their inner photosynthesis. That's a fundamental difference. And that gets back to what we discussed yesterday, that we are right now consuming the efforts of countless living beings, algae, plants, in history, trees. So it might be to that extent that the energy of the sun is not even really used whatsoever. That's just used as a working hypothesis. You can read this, that you can extract from this that measurements which have been doing on plant leaves, they are typically comparative, rather than that they absolutely really measure how much energy is really absorbed by plants. This is the research I could come across so far, at least. Again, I cannot prove it so in this short span of time, but we can just make it plausible. So and now Sarkar has a very interesting quote in his talk on Matter and Abstract. It's also in Microvita Cosmology, where he says chlorophyll and sun rays are not the same thing. So this is a very strange idea, because I mean every school kid knows that sun rays and chlorophyll are something very different. You know, sun rays are the energy coming from the sun is light. Chlorophylls are these little green things which are inside leaves. So why pointing out that they are not the same thing? But he seems to be indicating here, and maybe he perceives himself, that on a fundamental level, chlorophyll and sun rays are very much similar. That's in this hidden qualitative aspect of the creation. Quantitatively, they are so completely different that even a 6-year-old can see the difference. And Baba is not quite talking to us as 6-year-olds in this chapter, because it's a little bit kind of advanced subject there, matter and abstracts. So he's going a little bit detail here, including even rays of different celestial bodies. I mean, by our standards, plants are not really happy from the light from Venus or the light from Sirius, you know, that doesn't contribute anything. Yet Sarkar is mentioning it here. Why is he mentioning it? Because these celestial bodies, they constitute the macrocosmic order, which might also help through the medium of Microvita, we will get to it, to create life on this earth. Yesterday we touched on this subject, if this initial phase in the cycle of creation is kind of rocking back and forth, and we went through it, and ever more advanced materials are created, and at one point stars are being created who can create a planetary system which could host life. The whole macrocosm is involved. It's not just a local isolated event. So Sarkar seems to be hinting at that same phenomena, that even if life has already evolved, still life is under the influence of, let's say, maybe unseen macrocosmic vibrations, or whatever we want to call it. So
does it mean that like the potentiality or like the idea of chlorophyll is carried in the light waves? Maybe?
Very much so, yes. That's a quality, and we will look at it in more detail. So, like I said, this lecture is more technical, and also more spiritual. And then again, we go back to the climate science thing. So, wrapping up, the point here is to introduce, let's say, a working hypothesis that life is operated based on subtler principles than just the quantitative physics which we learn in school, in high school, and in university. And that's what we are concerned about as a spiritualists anyway, and how to use that to help formulate future society, future economy, future energy resources.
Sorry, I'm late, so I'm just wondering, do you say. So like because when we see things like green, it's a physical expression in terms of this visual expression in this the fire element, Samantha expression of this is how chlorophyll looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But then when he says this chlorophyll is carried by the different rays of different celestial bodies.
It's very strange. Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, probably it means the potential of the expression of chlorophyll is carried by these.
Something like that, and I feel what you mean, and I think you were a little bit close in the sense that the idea behind what sun rays are and the idea of what chlorophyll is, there's a very big overlap. And you can call it a potentiality, absolutely. So
They did an experiment in Santa Cruz recently where they had vacuum in some canister or something and had sun rays and biological what's it called compounds were
Mhm.
formed. It was like surprising. Like some
Oh yes, they have done such experiments already long ago. That you have just some very, primitive carbohydrates,
yeah,
and then amino acids are formed
yeah,
essentially, and they are deposited on the inside of the glass.
yeah.
Yes, and this happens in space also, and this is proven to happen even in these interstellar clouds, which we were seeing yesterday. This is happening all the time. So there is these let's say more complex biological compounds, they have a high degree of organization. They have a high degree what we call syntropy or neck entropy. So then already it starts, and that's kind of very primitive phases of Pradisangera already starting. Even maybe if there's no planets yet, it's a tendency within the universe to create order in a way we cannot understand yet, based on our energy physics or quantitative approach. Nana, you want to say?
So, chlorophyll is a material substance, right?
Yeah, it's a molecule, like we just saw. Yes, it's a very special molecule, even extremely special, and we'll go to that.
So, I mean, according to what Baba says, if it's a material substance and it's carried by sun rays, that means it's carried from one place to another.
Yeah, but that's obviously not happening. So Baba's hinting at something here. What they both were saying, it's more referring to the potential of it, or the inner idea, and the physics of that, what it could represent. I'm trying to introduce exactly here. That's why I mentioned this. What is the chlorophyll?
My mind is that everything is made of microvita.
Well, not exactly. Everything is made of microvita and energy. That's the whole microvita theory is about. Some people make it, they popularize it by saying, oh, we have something new, let's be interesting. Let's say everything is made of microvita, and microvita is the smallest particle of consciousness. That's not true. And like we just said, there's two inner faculties of consciousness. One is Krita Purusha, which is a microvita, and the other is the Jnana Purusha, which is energy. So everything is made from microvita and energy. But microvita makes energy, energy is a blind force. And with the help of microvita, energy flows intelligently. And we can reproduce it in very much detail now.
Microvita and energy in the light rays, then they could become chlorophyll.
Exactly. And that I feel...
So you don't see chlorophyll in it, but when they get to the plant, the presence of those microvita and that energy
Yes.
is the necessary ingredients.
Exactly. On the level of microvita, so the inner realm, the unseen realm of creation, where that is intelligently, where energy is steered intelligently, there's a very big overlap between sun rays and microvita and chlorophyll, and many other things. Basically, all the DNA, etc., etc., etc. There's an inner idea behind it, a vibrational idea, or call it a creative intelligence, relatively speaking.
Then if chlorophyll can be created, so many other types of things could be created.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. Basically everything. Hydrogen atoms, we get to that. So I have to move on a little bit. So I use this, this interesting discussions. I use this chlorophyll as just one of the examples of subtler physics. We are on the threshold of subtler physics, introduced by Baba. Another potential form of subtler physics is biophotons. What to say about biophotons? I mean, probably most of you know the concept. Live material, just like leaves, but also your finger, your hand, emits photons all the time. This process is somewhat understood, but not completely. And so the idea here is, and that's again like a working hypothesis, that the very process of life itself produces these photons without, let's say, photons coming in from the outside, or without any, let's say, conventional electronic interactions. There's a very unconventional way. It's not phosphorescence or certainly not fluorescence. It's bioluminescence. Well, it's actually also not bioluminescence, because that's basically a chemical process, like these fireflies. It's probably something still more exotic than that. Again, it's just like an example of possible subtle physics. You want to show us something, but you decide not to do it. No?
No.
Okay. I just want to show here they have kind of, let's say, high quality industrial physics, industrial machinery to measure these things. It's not like a very esoteric idea or so. So, and these biophotons, they have certain spectra, which spawned a whole kind of commercial business, healing with biophotons. And this is very much criticized by as I say, more clever mainstream scientists. So, and don't mean to, let's say, take any position here, but it could be that it's not unthinkable that the spectra of biophotons could be like a fingerprint of how life functions on a very fundamental level, on the DNA level. Dr. Pop is one famous name in this research. Okay, one different, very, let's say, convincing example is this called Breatharians. We have one guy we all know. What's his name again? From Germany, I forgot. I wasn't able to contact him, so maybe he died in the process. Well, actually, I don't think so. I know he did not, because I spoke to him after he has been a Breatharian for years and years on end.
Is it German guy, not a Polish guy?
No, he's from Germany. He's kind of thin, and he looks a little bit like a ray of light himself at one point. And I spoke to him, and I really wanted to get it in writing, basically. But for years on end, he lived on just one biscuit a day and one spoon of yogurt. So, and even that aside, the human body, also in kind of mainstream research, is shown to produce more energy than can be explained from the calories it takes in from food. So again, it's an example that life seems to be more clever in its energy economics than we are with our industry. So this again, just make an inventory of where we could look for if we want to do further research. This German or this?
Yeah.
Well, no, that was not him. I got him from the internet, and he is a kind of famous person in this field. I was just referring to another Margi brother who did this. What's his name? I will pop up again. And this is one maybe a yogi or so, who is known his whole life basically. He was a Breatharian. He never hardly ate anything, but he's okay, healthy, he's alive and kicking. So they did a test with him for weeks on end in a confined space, so that they could be sure he would not get any food. And still he kept alive, he was breathing and doing things, moving around. So this is like some pictures from a trial which they did, a kind of medical trial, or physiological trials, to say, if it's really true what he claims, and it turned out to be true, based on the publications, of course. So Sarkar says the body is a biological machine, obviously with consciousness, and we get to that why that is, why we think that is. But this biological machine apparently can do things which we cannot explain with physics, and even not with quantum physics. So, and this was the point which I just mentioned. This kind of official study shows that that up to 20% of the energy which is produced by us stems from an unknown source. We don't know where it comes from. So how is it possible? This is just fundamental factors, speaking in kind of Brahmacharya terms. This is one other guy I found, and he was doing, he comes from Maharishi background. He's using the Maharishi Vedic science as his own, let's say, context. And he developed some kind of setup where he could collect some subtle, what he calls subtle matter, and it would kind of condensate or contract in his device, and then the weight increases just ever so little, but it's measurable. Just over time the weight becomes more and more and more and more and more and more. It's a little bit reminiscent of what the universe is doing, creating dark matter. So, and dark matter is a confusing term because I think actually it's very subtle. It's a very subtle thing. So, just summarizing this kind of working hypotheses, life does not maybe not only, at least not only consume energy, it only uses energy implicitly. Yeah? And ultimately we don't consume energy either in that case, because we consume the net entropy or the syntropy, which has been built up by life over the billions of years. And that's what we are enjoying now, and everything is utilized in just this brief span of time of our
we convert energy into different forms.
Yeah, we convert it into different forms, but the thing is, it's a mental problem almost. We think in terms of energy. We define our environment in terms of this Gya Purusha. No, it's the energy Purusha or the light Purusha. It's basically it's Luciferian science. Like in using biblical term, it's a very charged concept, I know, but this is the world of Lucifer, the God's most beautiful angel. And so kind of religious idea is, and that is, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and that's what we're seeing now. If we start, quote unquote, worshipping this Lucifer Purusha, then we get into trouble, and then it becomes satanic. Now, I don't want to go there, we have more scientific talk here. But, I mean, this is what's happening, and then all the demons from the revelations are upon us. The rivers are polluted, the air is polluted, etc. Because we worship this Purusha form. It's not intrinsically bad, but if we design our lives and our culture and our whole social outlook and our whole society based on this Gya Purusha, this Luciferian Purusha, then society is going to the dogs, one way or another way. Even without the help of the earth itself, because you saw the history of the climate change anyway.
This concept of the Gya Purusha.
Gya Purusha, yeah, that's how you
relate to the concept of energy.
It is energy, according to Sarkar's definition. Gya Purusha is energy. Okay. And in terms relating to physics and quantum physics, it's very similar to the concept of conservation laws.
Okay, so the concept of there's a connection between this Gya Purusha or Lucifer Purusha with the laws of conservation of energy. That a dogma, like having a dogma of conservation.
Yeah, it's almost like a dogma. It's almost, I mean, it's also a psychological thing. It's not that exotic. For example, the first guy who discovered that, I mean, the oil was just bubbling out of the ground in Texas. You didn't need to drill for it. It was just coming out of the ground, literally, because they just got scoop it up. And there was then, in Germany, was this guy called Mercedes, I think, if I'm correct. And he was the guy who invented the combustion engine. So they put the oil inside the engine, and there we go. And there we had the whole industrial revolution. And we are still doing it today. It's very crude. And that's what we are doing. And let's say, nature lets us do it. Let's be fair. When we are given the opportunity, so it's not bad. We needed this phase to kickstart society. We cannot think of a really advanced, also let's say, spiritually advanced society without these material requirements. The earth has prepared for us, so we should maximally utilize it, but to the benefit of all. And we should not destroy it. And if we only think of this Luciferian world as our ideal, we ideate on that, then we lose track of the real God in those terms, and then you get all the demons caught up, pollution and climate change, everything. So this is basically the point of net entropy. We are living here in a very powerful bubble of net entropy, existing, for example, in terms of the differentiation between oil and oxygen. This is very unnatural. Thermodynamically, in terms of normal physics and chemistry, this ecosystem cannot exist. It's in a sense counterintuitive almost in terms of physics, because things burn sooner or later automatically. They oxidize. This is just going the opposite way, and so the differentiation, let's say the separation, I should say, between oxygen in the atmosphere and oil and other carbohydrates in the ground, this is what constitutes, on the macrocosmics, on a very big scale, the net entropy, which is our ecosystem. So net entropy is not a quality of the ecosystem. The ecosystem, what we call our ecosystem, which we are very congenial with, is the external phase of net entropy. It is net entropic state, and that's how it looks like on this earth. That is what it is.
Sorry, can you explain net entropy? Entropy means kind of from order to disorder. So
Entropy is disorder. Net entropy is order.
Yeah.
Yes, but probably the term came from our common understanding of entropy, was more introduced. So then they invented the term net entropy as being order. And sometimes also they use syntropy. Syntropy. There's maybe a slightly subtle difference, I don't know exactly.
So why does oxygen in the atmosphere and oil in the rock, when added together, produce order?
No, they constitute together the separation of atmosphere, of oxygen and oil, constitutes a net entropic state, a net entropic bubble in which we live. If we put them together again, then they create more disorder, and that's burning stuff. And that's what we saw in the beginning, with the two balls. You connect them. That was let's say, thermic example, and this is chemical, but the concept is the same.
In this case, the large animals like elephants or dinosaurs going and dying all in the same place, like they go to elephant graveyard to die, and they're creating net entropy or syntropy in this instinct, this life instinct.
Life also. If trees are rotting, then it also creates some net entropy. And Sarkar would probably say that's an application of negative Microvita. So, but it's not a qualitative thing, it's just how nature functions. But on the big scale, we are still there's a lot of abundance, a surplus of net entropy. And therefore we can live, therefore mammals can exist, and oxygen breathing mammals can exist because of the labor. So if you see this picture together with the idea of that life only uses sunlight as a catalyst and not even literally absorbs the sunlight, then we see that the ecosystem is really built up by the collective efforts of the billions of organisms. Like we are building up the convention here with our energy, our efforts, our working groups. This convention is also a state of neck entropy, and therefore it's dynamic. We can produce some new things, creative things. And likewise is the whole ecosystem we are born in. We don't know anything better. But what we see here around, all the trees and the atmosphere, it's a creation of life. Also macroscopic, but also biological life. And when we are burning oil, it seems like a very technical thing, but we are just turning back the neck entropy which was created in history. So, and okay, the idea is now to use these concepts to at least have an idea of how we would do technological innovation in the future. What kind of technologies, assuming that even solar panels having a lot of deficits, and of course most other resources, so-called sustainable resources like biofuel, has a lot of issues to it. Some people do as if there are already solutions, but I'm not sure about that. We don't really have sustainable solutions. There are many people are pushing for innovation. And then again, I think this microvita science, not so much philosophy, but microvita science could help us at least formulate a thinking pattern, a new paradigm for innovation, which you wouldn't think of based on, let's say, classical physics and not even quantum physics.
Sorry. So I can't understand how we use energy implicitly.
We use it explicitly, and nature uses it implicitly. That's the hypothesis. That's the new kind of thinking, which harkens back to microvita cosmology.
So could you give an example of nature using it implicitly?
Well, I mean, you could even argue that nature doesn't use the concept of energy whatsoever. Energy is implied. The only cases where energy is seen explicitly in nature is when something goes wrong, when the lightning is striking or a meteorite is striking, then a lot of energy is created. But in the everyday business of nature, energy is not used as a commodity.
Yeah, but an animal running is burning oxygen.
Yes.
Why is that not using energy? How is that using implicitly as opposed to us, for example?
Because within the whole context of that animal moving and doing its things, the net result is not that it creates more entropy. That could be the simple answer. Nature does not create more entropy. That already means, by definition, by law of physics, that energy is not used explicitly. The moment you use energy explicitly, you create entropy and you destroy the ecosystem. But the ecosystem is building itself up all the time, and since billions of years. So if you can, and that's the whole thing. If you isolate the system, if you isolate a single animal, if you have this kind of compartmentalized approach, but then you do exactly what is the whole problem here. You separate yourself from nature, from the, let's say, the creative spirit, and then you get into this Luciferian world, in biblical terms, and then what you do becomes destructive. It's as simple as that, It's more like a different way of looking at things, just like in the previous talk, than really having a breakthrough technical solutions at this point. We'll get to that.
So are you suggesting that there might be some technical solutions that allow us to use energy
Implicitly, yes, absolutely. And I hinted already at that when, at the end of the previous part, the part 1. So what we discuss now, if you put it in a diagram, then you get this, and this is microvita cosmology. So just to mention the different terms, basically Sarkar makes a difference between two Purushas. It's different from Brahma Chakra. It's very different from spiritual philosophy. And what people have been doing also after the talk yesterday, people come to me and they say, yeah, but in Brahma Chakra so and so, and they automatically take Brahma Chakra as the one and only form of cosmology that could possibly exist. But there are different cosmologies. Apart from, let's say, the Western science, if you wish. Microvita cosmology, the chapter is called Microvita and Cosmology, is different. It's fundamentally different from the cycle of creation. And where it does overlap, we'll check out right away. This is just basically what we have been discussing all the time, is that there is playing together of energy and another vector, which is hidden, which is this concentrated form of Microvita, and Sarkar calls it the actional faculty, the actional principle, Krita Purusha. This is the Krita Purusha, it's pure action. And pure energy is the Gya Purusha. And these are subjective factors. And they interact in a certain way, otherwise nothing would be created. And the most simple thing I could come up with to demonstrate the interactions is that from energy going back to action, there's confinement, creating nucleus of atoms, for example, if you look at that level, the level of quantum physics, and vice versa, action turns into energy through simply to deconfinement. These are terms which are very much introduced in quantum physics. So we have already here naturally an overlay between Microvita cosmology and quantum field theory. This is the kind of, yes?
So what is the element that does the confining?
What is, you might say, what's the concept which does the confining?
I mean, to confine
Well,
something, you need a confining force.
no, it's well, one way I could answer it is by coherence, by inner coherence. When subwaves in this case, get aligned, harmonically aligned, then they coalesce, so to speak, and then they create a nucleus. But that goes more deeper into the technical details than we possibly could go now. We need to kind of see the bigger picture here. Another answer I could give, but that's maybe a little bit cheesy at this point, just to say by positive Microvita. Positive Microvita causes this confinement, and that causes this confinement here. I choose here to use, let's say, more or less physics terms, but the term Sarkar is using here is propensities. And here he used a term, or introduced a term called generic essence. So, but I want to avoid to introduce as little new terms as possible, because I know from experience people really cannot absorb it all, So this, we use physics terms, we have energy, action, just as a concept of action, and how they relate to each other. So we can maybe just take it a little bit intuitional at this point.
I need you to explain again. So there's energy, basically it's a Gyan Purusha,
Mm-hmm.
this action part. And then what makes confinement? Under what condition you need to confine?
Well, you can see, but it's not a very scientific solution.
Because I don't
If
understand
energy
how-
flows, if energy starts flowing harmonically,
Yeah.
especially, for example, in the biological context, then it forms like a vortex to a point. This is, very intuitional approach, but this is how you could visualize it. It's not an external thing. It's like water. If water is flowing through a hole, it forms a vortex. So it's something like this. Yes.
Like coming to a point.
To coming to a single point. And again, I could explain this in as much detail as you want until you just run out of the room. But then we need a whole afternoon for that.
Microvita helps to bring things to a point.
Positive Microvita steer energy intelligently into one single point.
And so that would be in line with the idea that positive microvita are pro-spiritual, means they
Yes.
lead toward the spiritual. So the effect of negative microvita would be the opposite.
The negative Microvita, they create more vibration in the external world. And I think this is
So
scalar
by
magnetic.
confinement, you mean a kind of movement
to a point and subtle, but that's very tricky. And here we get a confusion with philosophy that static is automatically associated with crude. And this is completely trivial in a scientific approach. This is static, you might not easily expect, but this is a static point and this is sentient. But both are subtle. These are arguably cruder if you want to put those labels. I'm just saying these are equilibria and these are the interactions between equilibria. It's as simple as that. And so we are maybe naturally inclined to fill it up with all kind of things we know, like elements or magnetic force, etc. But it's a very abstract approach.
Are there any elements between this cosmology and Brahmachakra cosmology
Yes.
which are complementary and or contradictory?
Yes, and exactly that we are going to now, right now. And then gets a little bit more into the spiritual thing, and at the same time into possible technical solution, because that's, as Proutists, as at the Prout Convention here, that's where we want to move to anyway, at least an outlook to technical solutions. And at the same time it helps us to understand where I believe is the, let's say, the tangential point between what we call Brahmachakra and Microvita cosmology. But at the same time that would only serve people who still are believing that Brahmachakra is the one single all-embracing cosmology, and that's not true. It's a philosophy. It's a partially Advaita. It's partially dualistic philosophy. You cannot possibly begin to apply it scientifically. So you can also completely forget about Brahmachakra and just do Microvita science. Okay, but if people want to find one point where they come together, that point is called cosmic nucleus, or in, let's say, spiritual science or spiritual philosophy, the Purushottama. And this is part of the philosophical treatise from Sarkar, I should say, and Sri Shanamurti here, Paramashiva Purushottama Vishvashakendra. There we can find where the point where Brahmachakra and Microvita cosmology become very similar. So, and at the same time, you can see that life, if you consider the body a biological machine which nevertheless expresses spirit, which expresses consciousness, especially in the heart, it's found again and again and again that a pulsative wave, so not a flowing wave, not a sine wave, but pulsative waves constitute this connection between, let's say, the hidden part of creation and the external world. And the heart is doing that. We maybe think of the heart as which is just pulsing all by its own, which is true, but the heart is completely involved in all your interaction, all your decisions, everything that happens in your life is reflected in the heart. This has been my subject, also even my commercial subject for more than a decade. People are using this technology in the medical software I'm developing and selling to measure what we call heart coherence. And heart coherence is maybe, let's say, very early application of this idea, how life extracts spirit out of something which we don't know in physics yet. The heart is a physical thing. It's a chemical thing. So it's part of the laws of thermodynamics. But there's something else in the heart also, which makes us get centered in our heart, ideally. And that's only when the heart responds flexibly to everything which we experience. If that's not the case, I know firsthand people who are on beta blockers, they told me it feels like I lost a piece of myself. Because you get a beta blocker, for example, when you have tachycardia, your heart beats too fast. You go to your doctor, he prescribes a beta blocker, you go to the chemist, and you get your beta blocker, you swallow it, and your heartbeat is slower. Problem solved. Baba says allopathic medicines causes a concentration of negative microvita in other words, side effects. The side effects is that here the side effect is that not only your heart rate goes slower, also your heart rate fluctuations become less. So your heart does not longer sensitively respond to what's going on in your life, and therefore it's not so much your heart anymore. It's just an organic pump pumping blood around. So therefore I would never recommend using beta blockers to anyone, unless you're dying on the spot because your heart is over going too fast. But then there's also other solutions. It's a very serious drug with very negative side effects. Yeah, exactly. That's what it's supposed to do almost.
But it's not so easy to refuse it, because it really makes it as without you have,
It causes addiction. It's just a drug, like any other drug. Only you get it from a white coat instead of from a street dealer, but that's the only difference. It's a different label. So I would like all of us to take this, although we go into technical details, not forget to take it also intuitionally. And we could go in as much technical detail as you want, but not, we would need a whole afternoon for that. So the idea is that pulsative movements in life, in physics and in biology, are like a pivotal point between the hidden creation, which is also non-local, and the external world, the Luciferian world, if you wish. And now I have again one very complicated thing to introduce. I choose to put it in this talk, and this is where Baba speaks about bifurcation. So I don't hope I'm throwing too much concepts here in the group now. If it gets too much, then just say it. There's a difference. It also answers Dada's question in part. What is also the difference between Brahmachakra and Microvita theory is that in philosophy you have the concept of Prakriti, which is called the operative principle, and which is a part of consciousness itself and makes consciousness turn into matter. It's a crudifying force, philosophically speaking. In Microvita theory we don't have such an idea as Prakriti. It's non-existent. The whole idea of crudification is non-existent. But we have a different concept which is called bifurcation. Bifurcation means forking in two. The supreme entity becomes, there's a supreme Purusha, Baba calls it here universal entity. It differentiates itself into Krita Purusha and Jnana Purusha. So, and this is rather a scientific approach and less a mystical approach. And then both Purushas, both inner faculty of consciousness, again differentiate themselves into objective and subjective, or into the equilibrium form or the interactive form that we just saw. So then you go from 1 to 2 to 4. And then all in the last third stage of the bifurcation have an abstract aspect and a matter aspect. Turn to matter and abstract. So you have 8 different faculties ultimately there. Usually we only show the 4 in the diagram which you just saw. Now there is a trick here, because as we know also in philosophy, consciousness never changes. So there's a trend to say that the Krita Purusha, and that's what you see with other people publishing about Microvita, they give more status, a higher primacy, we say, to the Krita Purusha. The Krita Purusha is more like the real spiritual thing, if you wish, and the Jnana Purusha is just the earthly thing. I don't agree with that, because Sarkar doesn't make any signs, this kind of differentiation. Both are equally important. Yet, in some sense, one is more important. And so, therefore, the bifurcation, the creation process is asymmetrical. And the same concept of symmetry breaking, which we are talking about, you also have in quantum physics. This is one of the most progressive ideas and also the most fundamental ideas in quantum field theory is symmetry breaking. I just want to mention the term here, we really cannot go into it. But you see here, just also take it intuitionally, the universal field or the universal entity splits itself into an actional faculty which remains hidden, and the external faculty which we call energy, but it's an asymmetrical way. And this picture which you see here, like in a graphical way, shows that polarization is a very simplistic way to understand creation. I cannot express it. There's people still to this day who know about it, and still they try to promote Microvita science as some form of Shiva Shakti science. Well, I'm not going to be subtle here. That's a very stupid thing to do. It's just plain stupidity to do that, because then you completely destroy all the novelty, all the innovation Sarkar has put into Microvita cosmology. It is not Shiva Shakti science, and even Shiva Shakti science is not real about polarization. Shiva is much more similar to consciousness than Shakti is. Shakti is the force of Shiva, or the force of consciousness. And Brahma is also consciousness. So Brahma becomes, philosophically speaking, Brahma becomes Shiva and Shakti. But Shiva is much more similar to the original Brahma than Shakti is. So I'm trying to get across this idea of bifurcation as a far more subtle way creation goes about than plain and stupid polarization. There's only a retrospective. Polarization is just that we say, oh, consciousness exists of Shiva and Shakti. But that's not true. You can say that way, and retrospectively it's sort of correct, because then we reason from our own relative crude position. At the moment you take Shiva Shakti become Brahma in a polarized way, then you're basically establishing yourself as a very crude being.
Do you mean dichotomy?
Dichotomy?
Yeah, instead of
Yes, you can see a dichotomy. You can, yes, that's just maybe a psychological way to put it. It's a dichotomy. But I'm saying it's not a dichotomy, yes.
In Ananda Mitra's book, she starts off with a quote when talking about the first sutra. She starts off with a quote that says something like, if you make a distinction between Shiva and Shakti, you will forever remain stuck in the material.
I didn't know that, but that's exactly the point. And this way, your beautiful philosophy, and again, I'm not in any way discrediting Brahmacharya because it's beautiful. It's very mind expanding. But if you take it in that way as a dichotomy, you remain forever stuck in the lowest point of Brahmacharya.
When I try to teach Brahmacharya to people, I say, imagine a magician who is transforming himself into a rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
So he has his magical power,
Okay.
which he uses to transform himself. But
Mm-hmm.
it's all the magician,
Yeah.
right? You can't separate it. You can't.
It remains the magician, yes. So the magician never changes. We say, after sadhana, we say, nityam shuddham nirabhasam. Consciousness is that which creates without changing. That's very much mysterious. But we want to say something about it scientifically also. And polarization is not going to get us there. Or this is, if you insist in this dichotomy, you remain stuck, exactly as Ananda Mitra was saying, down. It's extremely good. In those early days, she pointed it out. I never knew that.
Well, she was only giving a long quote from Baba.
Okay, well, okay, yes, but nevertheless, so Baba himself pointed it out.
Yes.
It is not a dichotomy, but how can we solve this dichotomy? You can approach it, and the concept here is just one single term: is self-similarity. Consciousness produces stuff, or seems to produce stuff, through process of self-reference. And that's how it works. And that's probably how much in detail I could get now. So you could say, rather than A becomes B plus C, you can say A becomes A plus B. That's the subtle difference. and A equals A plus B can be solved if B is 0, so there is no creation whatsoever, consciousness remains just itself, or if A is infinite, okay, but then, yeah, if B is infinitely small, relatively speaking, then you don't know what you're talking about. And there's a third solution, also mathematically, through self-reference or recurrence. And we know this recurrence, for example, in nature, that's called fractality. Patterns repeating patterns, waves within waves within waves. And that's how nature creates.